Yeah, and I'm going to invite you to turn your Bibles to Psalm 122. Psalm 122. Psalms of Ascents. We've covered a couple of them so far, and now here we are in Psalm 122, which is entitled, Let Us Go to the House of the Lord. A Song of Ascents says it's of David. This is the first time that we see an author attributed to one of the Psalms, and so this one is of David. And it says there, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together, to which the tribes go up. The tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. Their thrones for judgment were set, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they be secure who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For my brothers and companions' sake, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good. The word of the Lord. This is an interesting psalm, and if you care about this kind of thing, but this psalm is written with what's known as a chiastic structure, which forms a kind of an X in terms of how it's structured, and so you have some ideas that start and then intersect and then end being stated in a different way. So for example, you have at the beginning there the reference to the house of the Lord, and then at the end you have another reference to the house of the Lord. So I won't go more into that other than just to point out the fact that there is structure, because sometimes we read these Psalms and it's poetry, right? And it can be hard to kind of wrap your head around and what is this about? And is this just, David's stream of consciousness? Is he just kind of writing stuff down, whatever's, on his heart at that moment? But it is poetry. There is a genre to it. There's a structure to it. And so I just wanted to point that out. And that's something that you can look into more as you do your own study on this psalm and the Psalms in general and just general Bible study. There's lots of different concepts that you can learn about there. So thinking about this psalm now, with that in the background, I want to ask you, how did it go this morning getting ready for church? What was your experience like as you got up this morning, or even thinking about last night? And you got ready and you were preparing to come to church. You were preparing for worship. What was that like? What happened? What feelings did you experience? Because everybody's got a different experience of getting ready for church and coming together for worship. When if you have a young family, the kids are little, you have babies perhaps, and young children, that can be a real challenge, to get everybody ready and dressed and fed and out the door and all that kind of stuff. And if you're in that situation, if that's your stage of life, I just want to congratulate you. You made it. You're here. That's a win. Even if you're a few minutes late, that's okay. You're here. Good. We're glad for that. Maybe if you're a little older, maybe closer to middle age, somewhere where I am in stage of life, and maybe you're at that point where you're kind of wondering, what is the point of this? What is the purpose? What are we doing this for? We got to do this again? Here we go again? Maybe that's your challenge. Maybe that's your struggle. Maybe you're a bit older and you have some physical challenges. Maybe you don't hear as well as you once did, and maybe that's a real barrier, and that's a real challenge and a real struggle for you to come to church. Maybe you want to hold back from coming because of some of those physical challenges. We all have a different experience. We all have a different challenge, a different struggle. And what I want to remind us of this morning, what I want to encourage us with this morning, what I think this psalm encourages us with and reminds us of is the fact that a proper orientation towards ordered worship results in, it leads to an outflow of good for all and glory for God. And what we see in this psalm here at the very beginning, the first couple of verses, is this real clear expression of a posture, of an attitude towards worship. There's an orientation towards worship. We have all these challenges, we have these struggles, we have all these things going on, but what we see here from David is this orientation towards worship. He says there in the first verse, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. It's as if David is saying, together with the gathered people of God, he's saying, look, we made it. We made it. We're here after all we've been through. You know, if you look back, Psalm 120 from a couple of Sundays ago, Psalm 120 was a psalm of distress and trial and kind of a reality check of the conditions of the world and our place in the world. You know, we talked about the falsehood and the deception and the problems and the dangers and all that sort of stuff, and how we're sojourners making our way through. We're on a journey. We're moving forward through life, through this journey of life. And then Psalm 121 was a psalm about the hazards of the journey. But then it was turning us towards hope and trust and promise. And we heard from Pastor Kevin last Sunday that the Lord is your keeper. In the midst of all that's going on around you, in the midst of all the challenge and the struggle, the Lord is your keeper, he says. And now here in Psalm 122, this is a psalm of arrival and joy and worship. And I want you to notice just a couple of things in these first couple of verses here. First of all, the attitude in verse 1. He says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Were you glad this morning? I remember, as a kid, and Mom and Dad would say, well, it's time for church. I'm not sure I was so glad all the time, But here, David expresses this gladness. This word glad is an interesting word because it most often simply means glad. When you see it throughout the Old Testament, it means joyful, happy, glad, really. It is used a couple of times, though, to mean merry, as in if someone were to drink alcohol as a mood elevator, but apparently prior to the full stage of staggering drunkenness. Now, I'm not advocating the use of alcohol in relation to worship or even at all necessarily, but this is the way this word is used. And so there's this sense of perhaps being a little tipsy, a little giddy. There's a giddiness to this gladness that we get here. This is the attitude of gladness towards worship that we see in David's psalm. That's the attitude. Secondly, there's the anticipation. Verse 2, it says, our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. We're here. We made it. We've arrived. We're ready. We're expectant. We're glad. We're giddy with gladness, as it were. It kind of reminds me of, perhaps standing in line for a ride at Disneyland. Anybody been to Disneyland before? They say it's the happiest place on earth, but have you seen the parents at Disneyland? Have you been a parent at Disneyland? I don't know if I was very happy when we were there. We did a trip to Disneyland a number of years ago with our kids, and in fact, we did more than Disneyland. We kind of did this whole Southern California tour, kind of hitting as many theme parks as we could because we thought, this is it. This is our one shot. We're never going to do this again, and that's been true so far. So let's just get it all done, right? But I can remember standing in line for like 2 hours for one ride, which leads to the unhappiness of the whole thing. But for the kids, and for some people, maybe not me, but for some people, there was this giddiness, this gladness, this expectation, this happiness, this anticipation, this joy, like, we're gonna do something fun. We're here, we've made it, we're standing literally at the gate, we're ready to go. Or like a team, like a sports team with an entrance song. You've seen this before. Right now, it's the beginning of hockey season, and so all the junior hockey teams in the area and the various leagues they're doing their home openers, and so usually there's an entrance song. A certain song plays, and then the team skates out, and it's this kind of this moment of pride and excitement and nervousness for the players and for the parents as well. Another example of an entrance song is Virginia Tech. Any college football fans here? Virginia Tech. I don't know if you've seen these videos, but they use the song by Metallica, Enter Sandman. And as soon as Enter Sandman starts playing, the whole crowd, like we're talking like tens of thousands of fans and college students and everybody, As soon as that song starts playing, the whole crowd starts kind of bouncing up and down, almost like one big organism all together with this expectation, this anticipation. And the players haven't even entered the field yet. The game hasn't even started, but it's like everybody's just ready to go. Glad, expectant. And so, reflect on this morning. Are you glad to come to church? Are you glad for worship? Because that's really the most direct application of this psalm for us as Christians. Eugene Peterson says that Psalm 122 is the song of a person who decides to go to church and worship God. For us, that's what this psalm is about. So again, are we glad to come to church? Are we glad to be able to worship? Now, not that we should be driven by our feelings, of course, right? We can't be. We can't be driven by our feelings. Otherwise, we'd choose to probably never come to church. We'd probably never choose to never worship God. We can't be led by our feelings, but feelings are certainly part of the equation. We are emotive people. We have feelings. We have emotions. We need to recognize that. That's part of the deal. Again, Eugene Peterson says that worship is an act that develops feelings for God. It's not a feeling for God that is expressed in an act of worship. Now, I would say it can be. It can go both ways. But usually, often anyways, for myself, I need to worship first and then the gladness comes. Sometimes the gladness is there first. Yeah, of course, and I hope it is. But, full disclosure, confession, I know this might be hard to believe, but even as a pastor, there have been times I've not always been glad to go to church. Sunday morning or even Saturday night. Sometimes there's more dread than gladness, to be honest. We all have different things going on in our lives. We have different challenges, different struggles. But this is a reminder of the gladness, the attitude, the expectation, the anticipation. Because you know what? Logically, it makes sense, doesn't it? That if we truly believe the good news, if we remember the gospel, if we put that at the forefront of our minds, then logically it follows that we ought to have this posture, this attitude, this desire, this orientation towards worshiping the one who proclaimed to us that good news. Yes, of course, logically that makes sense. Emotionally, maybe it doesn't always totally line up or make sense because we have this war within us, don't we? The spirit and the flesh, and there's this battle, there's this internal thing going on, this spiritual battle that happens. And it's hard. But one way or another, we get there. And here we are this morning, gathered together, glad when they said, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." Now, what does this look like? What does worship look like? Once we sort of get there, what happens? Is it kind of a chaotic free-for-all? Do we take that next step from, the giddy gladness? Do we take that next step beyond that to just full-blown, out-of-control, kind of hyper-spiritualized, spiritually framed, staggering drunkenness, as it were? Well, no, of course not. Of course not. Our God is a God of order, and there is an order to worship. There's a structure. There's a framework. There's a purpose. There's a reason. There's in fact, 6 different aspects of worship here that we see in verses 3 to 5. It says, Jerusalem, built as a city that is bound firmly together, to which the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. Their thrones for judgment were set, the thrones of the house of David. So 6 things. First of all, there's a place. The very first word there in verse 3 is Jerusalem. The name of the city, Jerusalem. There's a sense of location. There's a sense of center. Now, of course, as New Testament, New Covenant Christian believers, we know that Jerusalem is not the exclusive center of worship. Jesus said this himself in John chapter 4 when he was having a conversation with a Samaritan woman at the well. You know that story? And she asks him the question. She's like, my people say we should worship over here, and your people say we should worship over there. And Jesus says, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. And what he's saying in saying that is that the center of worship is no longer restricted to one particular city. The center of worship is now not a place. The center of worship is a person. And Jesus says the center of worship is now me. But here in the psalm, we have this sense of place for worship. There's a center to it, and we know that center to be Jesus. Secondly, there's a structure. It says, Jerusalem built as a city that is bound firmly together. Bound firmly together. The CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, renders it this way. It says that Jerusalem, built as a city should be, solidly united. So there's this sense of integrity, solidity, firmness, of unity. It's a picture of the people of God united in unity together for the purpose of worship. Yet not only unity, but also diversity. This is number 3. It says, it makes a reference here to the tribes of the Lord, the tribes, plural. And so we see in the unity, we see a diversity in the gathering of God's people. Fourthly, there's a direction. So these tribes go where? They go up. They go up. There's a directionality to worship. This whole series is the Psalms of Ascent. It's a picture of the people of God going up for worship. And I think that's a helpful image for us, because when we worship, we are really, what we're doing is we're looking up. And in doing so, we're taking our eyes off of ourselves and our circumstances. We're taking our eyes off of this moment, and we're setting our mind on eternal things, and we're looking up. I love the picture of Jesus in the gospel when it's described how he prayed. You know, it doesn't say that Jesus bowed his head and closed his eyes and folded his hands. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. You know, but often when Jesus prayed, the description is of someone who's of him looking up. And this is what we do in worship spiritually. We look up. And we take our eyes off of what's on around us. The things of the world grow strangely dim. And we set our eyes once again on what's important, what's eternal, and what is divine. Fifthly, there's a purpose to it. There's a purpose to worship. It says there that it was decreed for Israel to give thanks to the name of the Lord. The purpose, as described in this way, is to give thanks to the name of the Lord. It's interesting that the word there is give. Our response, as worship as a response, is about giving more so than it is about getting. You know, we don't come to church to see what we can get from it. We come to church to see what we can give to the gathering, to the people, to the glory of God. Now, of course, in the gospel, we get it all, don't we? We get everything. Jesus has given us himself, and in doing so, he's given us eternal life. He's given us everything. And so our response in worship is now to then give. In this case, give thanks to the name of the Lord, it says. And sixthly, there's an order. This is verse 5. Their thrones for judgment were set, the thrones of the house of David. That seems like a bit of an odd reference, you know, because we're talking about going up and the city and the structure and giving thanks and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly there's this reference to judgment. Like, where did that come from? But the sense here is of order and of the rightness of the decisions of God, who is the supreme judge. One more quote from Eugene Peterson, and then I'll lay him aside. He says that the biblical word judgment here means the decisive word by which God straightens things out and puts things right. And this, of course, we know to be fulfilled by Christ, fulfilled in Christ, and it is Christ whom we worship and by whom we worship. And so there's this sense of structure, of framework around our worship. It's not the chaotic free-for-all. It's not just, you know, do as you please. There's a reason, there's a firmness to it. It's kind of like, it really does remind me of a house. You know, the psalm is entitled, "Let us go to the house of the Lord," and we know the house of the Lord to be in a spiritual sense as believers. But it reminds me of an actual physical house. A physical house, a real house in this world, a house that you live in, has actually all 6 of these aspects that we've just looked at. First of all, a house has a place, doesn't it? It has an address. It has a location. There's a center to it. It has a structure. You know, you have a foundation, and then there's walls, and there's a roof, there's a structure to it, there's a unity to it. It comes together as a cohesive unit. Yet it's also diverse because there's several different materials used in the construction of a house. You've got concrete in the foundation typically, and you've got wood frame perhaps, and you've got trusses, and you've got asphalt shingles, and you've got metal, and you've got all these different materials, this diversity of materials that come together, and it makes a house, a single unit. There's also a direction to a house. A house is built up. You don't start from the top and build it down. That would be like a magic trick or something, because that's not how it works. It builds up. There's also a purpose to a house. The purpose is for people to live in it. You don't build a house and then just let it sit empty, let the rats take over it. You know, no, it's meant for a household to occupy it. And in that there's an order, because when a household unit, when a family, a person comes into that house, there's an order to that household. There's an order to that family. There's a structure within the people occupying that home. And what this does, what this reminds us of, this structure, this picture of this house, the house of the Lord, what it reminds us of, I think, is it stands in stark contrast to the chaos of our lives and the world around us. You know, isn't it true that we encounter chaos in various ways? I mean, just read the news or look around, or even on a personal level. You know, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what struggle you're facing, what disruption you're having, or will have or have had, but we all face these different things. We all face these things that are not the way life is supposed to be. And when we come to worship, this moment, this time, this place, each week that is ordered and set apart is unlike anything else we experience in our weeks, isn't it? It stands in contrast to the chaos that we live in the rest of the time. We come and we set our feet back on solid ground, because a lot of times we're standing in that sinking ground. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. So here we come for worship. We recalibrate, as our friend Steve Jans would say. Now, thinking about this, it can be very tempting to think, well, then worship must be all about me. It must be about me feeling better about my life, right? Well, no, of course not. Worship and the result of it and the impact of it is not strictly all about the individual. There's a corporate nature to it. There's an outflow from it. There's a result. There's an impact on your life, your family's life, the church, the community, and the world in general. And we see this in the last section here, verses 6 through 9, if you want to take a look at it. It says, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they be secure who love you. Peace be within your walls and security within your towers. For my brothers and companions' sake, I will say peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good." And it begins there with, in verse 6, an imperative. The imperative is pray, which could also be stated as ask for. Well, ask for what? Well, the words of a prayer are right there in quotations. The second part of verse 6 and verse 7, it's in quotations in my Bible. It probably is in yours too. This is the prayer. This is the prayer. It says, "May they be secure who love you. Peace be within your walls. Security within your towers." So the prayer is essentially for peace. Now, the word security that's used there does help to elaborate on the concept of peace. But the word we have there is peace is in Hebrew the word shalom. Perhaps you've heard this word before, shalom. Shalom, however, encompasses so much more than simply peace. There's not a great English equivalent for the word shalom. Shalom refers to peace, yes, but also prosperity. It refers to an intact state of favorable circumstance. It's a reference to completeness. It's the state of a totality of a collection of safeness, of salvation, a state of being free from danger, a state of health, a state of lack of disease and wholeness and well-being, satisfaction, contentment. The idea of having one's basic needs or more met, and in so being content. In other words, shalom is a reference to life the way God designed it and meant it to be, which is not how the world is. So this is why we are instructed to pray. Ask for this. Ask for God to continue to restore the world and restore our lives. Pray, it says, for the shalom of, now it says here, Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, are we to pray for the peace of the city of Jerusalem? Yeah, absolutely. Of course we should. But our prayer for peace is not meant to be limited to one municipality in the Middle East. Again, John 4, think of the conversation with Jesus and the woman at the well. And he said, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. The center of worship is not located in one city. The center of worship is me. And then thinking missionally, Acts 1:8, the promise there was that you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses. Where? In Jerusalem, yes. Jerusalem, and in Judea and Samaria, yes. And to the ends of the earth. You see, God's kingdom and God's glory is not limited in that sense. Rather, the goal, what we ask for, what we pray for, is shalom in the day-to-day life for all God's people, wherever they may be. And we see this flowing out, this idea of shalom flowing out in two ways. First of all, it's for the good of others. That's in verse 8. It says, for my brothers and companions' sake. So there's an outflow towards the goodness of others. And secondly, for the good of the glory of God. That's verse 9 when he says, for the sake of the house of the Lord. For others and for God. This is the outflow of it. And verse 9 seems to take things a step further with that word seek. It says, for my brothers and companions, for the sake of the house of the Lord, I will seek. That word seek seems to take the word ask a step further. We saw back in verse 6, it says, pray, ask for the peace of Jerusalem. And now it's saying, I will seek the good. That word good, by the way, is the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 1 in the creation account when God made something and he declared it good. He said, this is how it's supposed to be. This is what good means. And now we are instructed to not only seek and ask, or not only to pray and ask for, but to seek the good. And in other words, we are to join God in the restoration of all things as he restores our lives, restores the world. We're called to engage in that, to join him in what he's doing in that restoration. And so there's a real sense of a collectiveness around this, isn't there? You know, we don't come to church strictly for me. Yes, I'm impacted. Yes, I'm changed. Yes, I'm transformed in the course of worship. But it can't stay there. It can't rest there. It can't end there. There's a corporateness. There's a collectiveness. You know, we're not instructed to pray and seek in the sense of coming and consuming worship. We don't come and consume some music and consume some preaching and then say, well, that was nice, and then, you know, it ends there. We're told in the Bible to offer the sacrifice of praise, and that's done in the context of a gathering of the people of God corporately. Think of it this way. Think of the difference between these two different images here. One image is of someone who goes through the drive-thru at McDonald's and gets themselves like 15 McDoubles, which I'm sure I could probably eat in one sitting. Those things are awesome. But you get your 15 McDoubles, and then you sit in the parking lot in your car and just gorge yourself on those things and drive away. Okay, that's one image. The other is of someone who comes to participate in an open invitation banquet. An open invitation banquet takes a whole lot more work. It's way less efficient. It's way messier. You know, is it easier just to go through the drive-thru and get your fast food and chow it down and get out of there? Yeah, of course. But that's not the kingdom. The kingdom is an open invitation banquet where we all come together, we all bring something, we all give, we all contribute for the good of each other and for the glory of God. And so let me ask you this morning, are you praying for the shalom, for the peace of Salmon Arm, of the Shuswap area? What are you doing to seek the good of your community? Is your worship flowing out into your everyday life, or does it end here? Are you standing in the gap as a pointer to the one who is himself our peace? And it is that one that we celebrate, that we remember, whose death that we proclaim as we come to the table this morning.